limit today. And so I've asked Chairman Carpenter to allot 30 minutes to his bill. And then we have an additional bill that our assistants are handing out right now that we will allot the next hour to. And so we'll get to that. But at this time, Chairman Carpenter, if you want to come to the podium. And if you don't mind, just confirming that we're working on House Resolution 496, which is LC 490546. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, Chairman. I appreciate you very much. I get a little nervous up here at this podium because I think of rules and how many times I've come up here and been denied. So if I just shake a little bit, that's what's going on here. Bring back some old memories. So House Resolution 496 is a really, really simple bill. Basically, it would allow counties, if they so choose, to do elections for their school superintendents. And they would do this, obviously, first thing would have to happen, they'd have to vote on this to see if this was an option. And then their local delegation would come in and to submit a local bill to do this. But it would not require all school systems to do it. It would just require school systems that so choose to make that an elected position. The local board would be in charge of setting the salary, the qualifications, and the duties of that school superintendent. So they would be able to control who could run, but this would allow this to go back to the voters. Just a little history from what I understand. This used to be the way it was until the early 90s. And then government decided that they wanted to take the politics out of education. And if I felt like that's what was going on currently in the state of Georgia, then I would be all for that. But unfortunately, what got me turned on to this bill was what we saw in Gwinnett County, when I think probably the best school superintendent the state of Georgia has ever had, because the school board got flipped in elections, got ran out of town. And so that's what got me in charge, what got me onto this bill with another member as well. But I just felt like, unfortunately, politics is in education. And so what we need is a separation, just like we have in the House and the Senate and with the governor. We let the people vote to elect their superintendent. The people elect their school board. But that way, the school board does not control the superintendent. And so that's why I got into this bill. I'm going to read you a quote from J. Alvin Wilbanks that really sums up what I'm trying to do today. "I'll never forget who the school belongs to," says Wilbanks at a luncheon. "They don't belong to the Board of Education. They don't belong to the school administration. They belong to the people." And so that's what this bill seeks to do if a county so chooses to elect their school superintendent. And I'll be glad to take any questions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments, but I do, with all respect to Superintendent Wilbanks, I don't know if he's necessarily the greatest superintendent in the history of the state of Georgia. I mean, we do have the superintendent of the year who is previous superintendent of the year. So,
well, I would say that he would be he's a close second right there beside you, sir. He's probably not going to vote for this bill anyway, so I don't have to love up on him too much.
He'll remember that when it comes time for a vote, right? Yeah.
I think that ship's already sailed, Chairman.
Try to always start us with a little humor, but let me be serious for a minute. And I apologize for not mentioning this earlier. Here's the posture that we're in on both these bills today. These are both hearing only. So I want the committee members to be aware of that. And also just the guidance that I always like to mention. We're here to ask questions of the author of the bill. We're not here to debate the bill. That could and would happen at the appropriate time if the committee so moved towards action. So I'm happy to entertain questions for the chair or of the bill author, Representative Laricchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the form of a question, is it not true that there are lots of counties that have great school systems that have superintendents that are hired by the school board members? They have great relationships. They have, high graduation rates, high excelling students that are not in favor of moving towards an elected superintendent for exactly the reason you mentioned, and that's politics. They control one of the largest budgets in the county, if not the largest, and that they have a lot of authority to hire and fire and pay people, salaries that they choose. And that has been discussed up here before, and that was one of the concerns. And again, is that not true?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand your concern. So nothing in this bill would require those counties to do that. This, obviously, I didn't go through the piece about this being a constitutional amendment. So this would have to pass with 120 votes in the House. But then the county would have to so choose through their elected officials. Obviously, you understanding that dynamic and feel like your counties are doing a good job, then nothing changes for you. You have to decide that you won't change through your elected representative. And then he would bring a local bill down. That if that passed, then it would be up to the public to decide. So nothing has to change if you don't want it to change. But I think what we're finding is a superintendent only has to really be beholden to the people on that board, and the other 100,000 people in that community don't have a whole lot of say other than when they get a chance to elect the school board.
Chairman Carpenter, walk this committee through that process of assuming that this body passes this bill, the Senate, that it comes out of this building. What then happens in any county in Georgia that we're to decide to pursue? How would that process work?
Okay, so basically what would have to happen is we would have to pass this bill. It would have to be voted on by the public. And then you would have to drop a local bill if it passed to just like we do with any election bills, right? Like we're doing with these cityhood bills. And then the actual people of that city and county or school system would have to vote on it.
And they would
to whether or not to do it. And then you would have the election.
Okay, thank you.
So just very similar to how we're doing the citihoods.
Got it. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Representative. So you described, what brought you to wanting to bring this bill to us, the change in Gwinnett. Is there any other school system in the state that has brought this issue forward?
Yeah, there has been a couple of other, some of your fellow legislators that represent districts that have been concerned with some things that have happened in their school with their superintendent as well. Not mine personally. I love my folks. My brother's an educator, a principal, and I get along just fine with our folks, and they're doing a good job. But there has been some concern.
Yeah.
So it's not a personal bill for me, other than when I heard the theory and then I saw what happened in Gwinnett, I said, shouldn't the people at least get a chance?
Mhm.
Because I guarantee you, if you did a vote in Gwinnett with Will Banks, he would have passed. He would have got 80% of the vote, probably like a sheriff in town or anybody else, because of what he's done for that school system.
Ma'am.
Yes,
I have
ma'am.
one more. Yeah. So, what is the position of the superintendent, the superintendent groups and the school board groups on
Well,
this legislation?
Obviously, the school boards are probably not for it because they like to be able to be the group that hires the superintendent. And obviously the superintendents don't want to be elected. So they're
And
probably
why would you
against
think
both of those.
superintendents wouldn't want to be elected?
I don't know. You'll have to ask them that question, but I would think if you're doing a great job, then people would elect you.
Thank you, Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, we're talking about a fundamental change to how we administer public education in Georgia, right? Which is why it requires a constitutional amendment.
Yep, because it was changed. Yes, Constitution was changed in the 90s, early 90s. Yes, sir.
83.
83. Okay.
But question,
So I apologize for it, but so it was, you could be up through 93, I think was when it finally cleared out. So go ahead.
so are they electing superintendents anywhere else in the country? And if so, where? Do you know anything about any statistics about or data about that?
I actually don't have that data. I apologize. I can get it. I'll bring it to you tomorrow.
Sure. I'd just be curious to know, because I'm not aware of any superintendents being elected anywhere.
And I'm gonna let Vice Chairman Irwin chime in here just for his opinion and input and knowledge.
And if I understood your question right, Representative, it was, you said the 80s that the law was changed to go from elected?
No, I thought you were referencing when the Constitution was last updated.
Oh, no, I was talking about the superintendent piece.
No, okay, we're talking past one another.
Got you. Okay.
Chairman Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, two things. Do you have any information on the how many, and this may have been asked already, of number of school superintendents currently in the state of Georgia that are elected?
I don't think there's any.
You don't have that? Do you?
Oh,
Zero?
you got 3. 0.
Zero.
Yeah, that's what 0. I think after 93,
After
it
that?
went to 0. Yeah.
Then they became part. May I follow up? Okay. Wouldn't this more or less be parallel to the way the state school board, which I served on, works right now? We have school board members appointed by the governor instead of elected by the people, but we also have a state school superintendent who is elected by the people. So wouldn't this be very similar to the way it works at the state level?
Yep. Very similar structure. Yes, sir. Except instead of having a governor that appoints it, it would be actually the people that appoint the board as
And
well.
we would not be changing at all how our school board members are elected locally.
Yep. That's right.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Chokus. Representative Carter?
Thank you. I think your bill says, and currently is, the school superintendent is the executive officer over the local school district. With changing hiring to electing, is it not true that now we're adding another level of politics to education when we continue to hear that we're trying to take the politics out of education?
Yeah, I would agree with you, other than the fact that it seems to me that there has been politics have been injected back into education at the school board level. And so having a separation between the board and the superintendent, just like we have separation between the House and the governor, those separations are healthy in the long run. So long as that board sets the qualifications that the superintendent is capable of doing that job.
Thank you. Representative Wade?
It's actually me, Mr. Chairman. Close enough.
You're up.
Hey, Chairman Carpenter, thank you for this. Just a point of clarification. On lines 15 and 16, it says the qualifications, duties, and salary of the school superintendent shall be established by the Board of Education as provided by general law. I assume that Board of Education is the local board.
That's correct.
And then are you able to speak into all how that board sets those qualifications for who can run for the local
No, I
superintendent?
mean, so it hadn't been set because there's, the school board would set that one if this county chose to
So
do that.
each local school board sets those qualifications.
That's right. So I assume that would be in that local bill that's dropped
Okay.
by their legislator.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Jaspers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Carpenter, just two things. One's just in your community in the Whitfield County, have you ever asked a community group in a community meeting what their thoughts on this are? And just show of hands or affirmation vote what they think?
What my community thinks about
About
hiring
doing
a
this,
school
yeah.
board? I have not.
You haven't,
Mm-mm.
Well, I
Because
did
it's
in
really, I mean,
mine.
I don't think that Whitfield County and the city of Dalton would do it personally.
I did in mine, Chairman, and it was about 95% of the people in the room, of about 80 people, were in favor of your bill.
I'll be sure to go back home and ask them then. I mean, this might
They
be the first
were.
time we agree.
Maybe,
It's a miracle.
well, we had some others we've agreed on. And, but, this is one thing I've seen in my area that, one county may not and one county might. This just gives communities a choice for their own direction. Is that not true?
Yep, that's correct. And I don't know, we all pay property taxes, right? And so that's a big piece of our property taxes. So having a little more say in it, I think is fiscally a fair thing as well.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Jaspers. Chairman Carpenter, so explain to me, because I truly don't know. So we have I understand where your bill's coming from and the direction that we're going. If we have a duly elected superintendent as well as a duly elected school board in that same municipality, county, et cetera, how does that dynamic work? Again, today, a school board has hiring and firing capabilities. How would that work in this situation with two duly elected?
Yep. So I think that would be the challenge, right? Is if the school board's not happy, then they would have to wait around to the next election to get them to get them removed. Obviously, we can, have that conversation in the enabling legislation if this passed, right? And say that, that gives them a right for certain reasons to get rid of the superintendent. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But it clearly is a move to remove power from school boards and put it back into the hands of the people.
Understood. Vice Chairman Irwin. Hold on. The monitor's dead.
There you go. Am I on? Representative Carpenter, I want to check to see if you've done your homework for a minute.
All right, that's not
If
good,
you would
folks.
allow me that
He's
opportunity.
pulling the teacher hat out now, folks. The dog ate my homework, coach. I'm sorry.
That's right. Are you aware there's only 13 states in the country that elect their state school superintendent
Really? 13.
out of 50? That's correct. Let me give you another number. There are 3 states that elect their superintendents out of 50 also.
What 3
And-
states are those?
That allow election. Really, it's a hybrid in a few states that allow that. And if I can get my numbers correct, there are 14,500 superintendents in the country, and only 147 of them are elected.
Which 3 states?
Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi.
So it looks like it's coming across. There's a wave.
The way.
We're start of a trend. We're on the front side of this there.
And I would bet.
We're on the
you
front
no
of this
means-
trend. It sounds like things about to sweep up the East Coast and we're going to be the next rung.
And final statement to you is I'm always for the opportunity there for the communities to have that local control and look at it. I just think it needs to be dug into and the homework done at what has been done in the past, what was successful.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Representative LaRicchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. I just text one of my counties and I'm curious that Mr. Irwin may know the answer, but I think there are counties that elect a school board chairman at large, that they elect board members in districts, but they elect a school board chairperson in the whole county. And to me, that sounds like and again, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this is not a debate. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. You absolutely add back a level of politics, because I give you an example, and I don't mind saying this on camera. My son went to get lunch off campus the other day, got suspended. Dad's a state rep. Well, I'm totally in agreement with that. Send him home. But I could have been one of those parents that blamed it on the school, not the child. I could make it hard for a superintendent in my area. Everybody don't love me, but a lot of them do. You know what I'm saying? You really, I think you're getting into a very unique area of government in there with the ability to tax and millage rates and the number of employees. So I just wanted to make sure if y'all had discussed that that some counties elect board members from different areas, but they elect the county, the chairman at large, which is that position that everybody could go after if they didn't feel like they were properly managing that school system.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Representative LaRicchia and Chairman Carpenter. I want to work with you on this. I have a couple of questions that really fall more into legislative council kind of land.
Sure, absolutely.
Does this have to be in there? So I'd love to work with you and Representative Scoggins on this so that we may have a chance to bring this back before the committee in the future if you're agreeable to
Yeah,
that.
no, absolutely.
Okay. I see no other questions from the committee. Going once, twice. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And you even yielded some of your time back. Representative Wade's going to appreciate that. Representative Wade, if you want to come over here and join us at the podium, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, and to Chairman Nix and Representative Hill online, you should have before you House Bill 1084. And Representative Wade, when you get up there, I want to confirm for the committee that we're working on the right LC number.
Chairman, thank you.
Yep, and that is
Else, oh, go ahead.
LC 490827 by substitute.
That's correct.
And if you'll just give a moment to get everything handed out. So committee members, again, we'll have a hard stop at 4:30 today. And this is a hearing only. Representative Wade's bill was heard in subcommittee earlier today, and the committee recommends that this bill do pass. So with that, Representative Wade, the floor and the microphone are yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman, colleagues, and to those that are here attending from the public. I appreciate your presence and your engagement in this discussion. For many of you that attended the subcommittee meeting just earlier today, I will shorten my comments, but I want to make sure that I do cover some of the main points that were discussed and potentially even respond to some of the questions that may not have been completely and fully articulated a response. So first, I want to talk about where we are and why I'm so passionate about this legislation. Ultimately, we all need to understand that in the educational world today, the center of this issue is children. It's not adults. I shared with the subcommittee some current data as well as articulating that this bill is not going to prevent the teaching of some of the dark days of our nation's history as well as the history of the world. I shared some data about modern day slavery, where over 40 million human beings are currently living in the status of modern day slavery. I also shared with the committee members of the importance that teachers, administrators, and parents and grandparents, guardians have in the success for their students' life. And that we need to make sure that we provide opportunities that when there are difficult discussions and there are issues that the national media wants to continue to divide our nation based on the issue of race, that we make sure that the school system and the classroom is a place in which each and every single child is completely and totally supported based on the opportunity that they have just by being in existence. We do not need to allow for the idea that children are somehow superior or inferior to one another based on the color of their skin. I want to give you this little piece also, and I shared a couple of things. There were people that were very concerned that we are trying to offer up a solution in search of a problem. I provided each of the committee members here today evidence that has been noted by state and local media of incidents that have happened in our state. So this is not something that is just made up. I also want to let you notice and discuss, and I'm open to questions from the committee members about where we are as a country and how can we make sure that children are encouraged no matter the background that they come from, and empower teachers to be able to be protected when there are difficult situations, but parents have concerns. We've all experienced an unprecedented 24 months. I wasn't in this chamber 2 years ago. I was a local school board chairman. I care passionately about teachers. I'm a son of 2 teachers. My wife is a 20-year career educator who has taught first grade, 5th grade, special needs students, gifted students. She was a special ed director for a middle school, and she's now an assistant principal. We have 2 children. My daughter is a 2nd grader, and my son is a kindergartner. They experienced, my daughter, her class, and all the 2nd graders in this state experienced the shock of their life as kindergartners in March of 2020. You know what my daughter missed the most? She missed her teacher. She loved her teacher. But you know what she missed the most? Her friends. All of them. I want us to try to address this issue and review it through the eyes of a child and how they come into this world. So I will read this and then we'll open it up for questions. Colleagues, I am presenting this as a substitute for the Protect Students First Act. I want you to know my heart that this is about children and making sure that we protect them. I do believe a quality education is the foundation of our future for kids in our state. For millions of young Georgians, the entire trajectory of their lives is molded in the classroom. I believe as policymakers, it's our responsibility to ensure students are given the tools necessary to succeed in a safe, welcoming, and informative environment. And that's why I've joined many fellow legislators to the call to action from parents and community members who have concerns and want to make sure that they have a seat at the table. And I acknowledge that in most school systems in our state, that probably occurs. But a lot of parents aren't aware of the processes. They're not always skilled to know exactly how to navigate difficult situations. This bill will try to help address to ensure that all parents and teachers and administrators are equal partners to address concerns when they arise, such as the evidence that I provided today. There are also folks here that have, not here, but in the world, that have partisan agendas that want to continue to divide our students along political lines, promoting the idea to teach them that they oppress their fellow classmates solely because of the color of their skin, and that students' character should not be judged by their actions, their words, but somehow go back to judging people based on their race. This approach is dangerous and wrong. We all have seen and heard the extreme and loud voices of the extremes on both sides of this issue as parties and honestly fundraisers want to try to make headlines and generate revenue. Think about this as a child. If you have a child or if you have a grandchild, think about this. They're watching. We sing a little song in my home. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see, right? Many of you may know that reference. They're seeing us as adults not figure out a way to be more unified. This Protect Students First Act, which is before you, will ensure that each and every student in Georgia is treated with dignity and respect, and their education is provided to them free from any divisive ideology. We also protect the academic freedom and free speech rights of our faculty and staff and students. It does encourage training that enhances learning about different cultures and promotes mutual respect and tolerance of different viewpoints. I know that there are some in the media and maybe even some in this room that believe differently, but I believe that we have, through input from the current Department of Education, as well as Superintendent Woods, from organizations like GSBA, GSSA, Gale, GAE, and others, parent groups, former superintendents. I talked to one of my best teachers, my mom, this morning before I came in. I didn't share this in subcommittee, but my mom and my dad were married in the summer of '69, and they were both educators in Decatur. And they remember and raised my brother and myself to follow after the greatness of the ideas that Martin Luther King fought and died for. I believe that his approach would be the best approach as we face these issues. But remember, this is not going to prevent teachers from teaching about the divisiveness of the past. There is specific language in this bill that has been tailored to ensure that they will have their academic freedom to discuss things. What this bill does is define divisive concepts so as to ensure that children are not used as pawns for any political ideology to take over the classroom. I do believe if you'll read this bill thoughtfully and considerately, I've tried to listen to every person that has contacted me. I've reached out to people that I knew did not agree with this bill early on because I want their feedback. To the committee members, I appreciate each of you as colleagues and as equals in this body. We all are elected to represent people and their concerns.
there are many people who have concerns that we need to try to continue to heal the divide in this land. And I want to talk about the process as it relates to people have concerns about teachers being attacked or principals being made as decision makers that could continue to cause a divide. I believe the process that's outlined in this bill will actually help cool difficult situations. There are 150,000 teachers and support staff and educators in this state. I want the committee members to know that this is from the PSC themselves. During the period of December of 2020 through December of 2021, unfortunately, through an existing process in law, 83 educators lost their certificates, meaning they did something in the classroom or in their job that went against the rules of this state, or even in some cases, their local design rules. 83 is a very, very small number. But if you are a parent or a grandparent of a child that is in that classroom, the only teacher and the only issue you care about is what happened with that event. I too believe that the issues that people are concerned that this is going to cause an influx of calls to the principal to say that, hey, we've got this divisive concept, or we've got this teacher. I know there's a concern there, and I respect that. But I also remember last year when I discussed passing Senate Bill 47 to expand very narrowly, and I believe measured approach to address extremely sensitive situations for students, that we're going to flood the school system and they're going to leave in droves to take this scholarship. And folks, I'm here to tell you, a year later, there are 97 additional students in that program out of 1.7 million. So the concerns were warranted, but the reality was not as bad as people thought. I know Georgians, and I know parents, and I know kids, and I know teachers. I think that this is going to be a situation where we are now providing a clear and concise path to allow for conflict resolution to occur at the local level, and when appropriate, if a teacher has stepped beyond, there'll be an opportunity for that teacher to share their side of the story through this resolution process and potentially alleviate the parents' concerns through an open and honest discussion about some of the toughest issues that we face as a nation and a state. To the concerns about what happens if the parents' concerns are not alleviated at the local level, it would then go to or at the local school, it would then go to the local school board. The superintendent and the school board would deliberate, discuss, they would do their own review. That happens a lot with other issues within schools each and every day. If for some reason the school system doesn't believe that the parent's information is accurate, but that parent believes that their evidence is worthy of consideration, then they will have an appeal process on the incident itself, not whether or not the school system disciplined a teacher or not. We're not going to get into personnel issues. It's about trying to correct what probably is an unforced error, but could be somebody trying to radically bring politics and their opinion on race into the classroom to divide children. And that's what this bill is aiming to prevent. But ultimately, the parent will have a final step to go to the state board, and the state board would review. They would allow the State Department of Education to come and do a review process to determine. And if there are findings and the state board agrees that the parents' concerns were warranted and accurate through a corrective action plan, they would ask the school superintendent and the school board to accept the corrective action. And there's a time frame laid out to do that. If and only if that school board refuses to accept the recommendation of the State Board of Education, then and only then would specific, targeted, related to the incident, would strategic waivers or charter school system waivers potentially be called into question. So very narrowly focused to try to focus at the root of the issue, because generally speaking, it is, and I believe in this state, we do not have a systemic issue yet, but I want to prevent it because I've only seen over the last 8 years as a parent, because I'll tell you, on October 3rd, 2013, it wasn't about me anymore. That little girl that came into the world changed my entire focus. I believe all my experiences prior to being a parent, being a school board member who was elected to serve because I was a product of that public school system. And I saw friends of mine who unfortunately were in an environment where they were told that they weren't good enough and they might as well drop out. In 1993, I had 200 classmates as a freshman in high school. As a senior in 96, I graduated with 96. I understand rural issues. I understand local poverty. I understand there are challenges. To the teachers, former teachers in the room, I know there are days you don't eat, you don't go to the bathroom, you can't sleep at night, and your job has never been harder. But I know my wife, she gets up every day. She talks to parents on the phone up until midnight because they have to work a night shift and they get up at 11. Teachers work their tail off. Administrators and principals do it because they love kids. They don't make enough money. Even though QBE is now going to be fully funded for the third time in 4 years, even though we've given the highest pay raise in the state's history, all of those things are great. We're getting in the right step. I want you to hear this is not an attack on teachers. This is to ensure that we all are balanced and we keep kids at the center. All kids of all races. This is not just about the history of Black Americans and white Americans. There are a lot of, I have family members that have Cherokee heritage. I myself recently, through studying history after my dad's passing last year, I found out that we have Jewish heritage on my dad's mother's side. I come to you honestly at this approach, and I've tried to channel my father, my pastor, and one of my favorite elected officials who is no longer with us, Johnny Isaacson. But his approach to this is we're all friends and we're going to be future friends. Let's try to tackle this together so that we can meet tomorrow, that children are going to look at each other as just fellow human beings, right? We're the human race. Yes, we are going to make sure that they know the Georgia standards. Matt Cardoza, I want to tell you, I appreciate all the communication. He will be sharing with each of the committee members, since we're having a hearing only. I want you to see the Georgia standards as it relates to where I have received the most feedback, and that is citizens' concern that we were going to somehow stop teaching about slavery, the civil rights era, the atrocities that we've experienced in our state and our nation, or even world history, where the Holocaust was such a horrible time in our history. The Georgia standards are not changing with this legislation. I would even join in a bipartisan effort to ensure that this state continues to look at history that might have gone overlooked. Folks, I believe this bill is a good bill. I believe this bill will help parents, and I also ultimately believe it will help heal in places that are ready to heal. We heard testimony from folks that are for this bill and against this bill, and I respect that. But I want you to know the intent of this legislation and the way that it is carefully written, and I'm subject and willing to make changes if we need to based on other feedback from committee members, from all parties, from all races. Folks, we're Georgians. But this bill is not going to prevent good educators from doing their job like they're doing right now in the classroom. It's going to ensure that we don't allow a fringe few to encroach on dividing children in the classroom based on their race. With that, I yield, and I'll ask any questions or answer, do my best to any of the committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wade. If I may begin our questions here, if you'll
Please.
start with me on line 65.
Yes, sir.
One of the comments that I've heard most often is, how does this impact? And I'm going to just use the language in your bill, the free expression and freedom of expression. So could you speak to line 65 and what this bill does and does not do?
Certainly. So if you'll notice on line 63, this is the part of the, and I'm not a lawyer, so I will say I'm still learning legislative language. Michael Walker and my wife said, my goodness, I don't know which Walker you're talking to. My son is Walker, and Michael Walker has been on my phone often, so he has done a good job of helping me with this. But nothing in this code section shall be construed to. So this is not going to inhibit or violate the rights protected by the Constitution of Georgia and the United States of America, or undermine intellectual freedom and free expression. It is clearly stated. Thank you.
My second question, and I'm not saying that it only pertains to line 73, but I'm just going to reference,
Yes.
your bill references a training program. I've also heard comments about training, and whether that be teachers, whether that be to your family's case, an administrator. Speak to what this does or doesn't do as
Sure.
it pertains to training.
So ultimately, based on early on the legislation where it defines divisive concepts, okay? We've gone through a process, and I want you to hear this. There are people that are in this room that may not agree with each one of those as a divisive concept. But out of all the communication that I've received, this narrowed list is the majority. There's also things that I removed from this list that people who want more call to action, that language has been removed. So a teacher is not going to be allowed to be in a training program that would provide them an opportunity to learn how to teach children to view each other based on their race. So if you remember that language, it will not allow a teacher to be trained to teach children that they are superior or inferior to each other, or that they should be considered less than or greater than based on their race, et cetera, that's spelled out in the bill. What we're not going to prohibit, right? We're going to ensure that a school administrator, teacher, other school personnel, or an individual facilitating a training program from responding in a professionally and academically appropriate manner and without espousing personal political beliefs to questions regarding specific divisive concepts raised by students, school community members, or participants in a training program. Okay? There's going to be the opportunity to discuss and learn how to train teachers, new teachers, experienced teachers about the issues that we've had, but it's not going to allow them to do those specific things. And I want to give you this example. I remember being in school, and this is not adding to the debate. I'm just going to talk about it from a teacher's kid perspective. The struggle that my dad, who had a degree in seminary, Latin, as well as mathematics, computer science. He went to Georgia State. My dad, I'm never going to be as smart as my dad, but he believed that his faith was a part of his education. But he was asked, based on the change in the law, that he couldn't pray with kids anymore. He didn't love that. He had concerns about it because he felt like it was good for kids to love their neighbor. But we don't proselytize in the classroom to this day. And I'm a person who grew up in a school system that transitioned early in my elementary days to where it was completely and totally faux pas, right? Can't do that. You're proselytizing. You're not allowed to do that in the school. And communities, some embraced it immediately, some struggled with it, some finally accepted it. But we also shouldn't allow the proselytizing of a political ideology in the classroom. And we're not going to have training programs that are far right, far left, to try to ingrain a change and create more divisiveness in classrooms in our state.
Thank you very much. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Wade, I first just want to say that that I respect you as a colleague, and I do think that your intent here is sincere. So I don't question your character when it comes to this bill. But I wonder if you would agree with me, as someone from the education field, as a fellow teacher myself, that educators have a responsibility to teach more than just facts for our children.
if the gentleman, if you're referenced into context, like facts and context as it relates to facts, yeah, especially when you get into seventh, eighth, and beyond, completely agree. This bill will not prevent that from happening.
Well, and I asked that because I taught middle school, I taught sixth graders, and, you know, my job title was math and science teacher, but quite often, most of what I was doing was teaching not just math and science, but just how to navigate the world, how to navigate daily life for these sixth graders who are coming into their own and learning what the world is like and learning how to deal with stress and all of that stuff. But we do have to teach facts, and facts are stubborn things. And so I'm looking at the substitute, and in particular, I'm drawn to line 30 that defines as part of divisive concepts under B, the United States of America is fundamentally racist. And as I taught math, science, and social studies, and as a former social studies teacher, I'm just wondering how you teach American history in a way that does not always violate this section here, because I think of the Trail of Tears, where we literally stole this land to be here today, in a very racist way. I don't think you could argue it wasn't racist. I think about the Constitution that defines Black men as 3/5 of a person, that was written by white men talking about Black men. I don't see how you can't say that was not racist. I think about Korematsu v. the United States of America, where the Supreme Court said we could inter a group of people on our land because of their race. That is our history. How do you teach that in a way that doesn't violate line 30?
Well, you know, my mom is somebody I talked to. She was a teacher. She was an English teacher. So I read this bill with my mom this morning, line by line. And she reminded me that a lot of times the media in the world forgets the difference between very, very short and simple words. And I mean this respectfully, because I do have a great mutual appreciation for you and your experience, and I consider you a friend. Is and was are two very different things. And I want you to hear me when I say this. That is what I think people are missing about this legislation. Nothing in this legislation tells us that we can't talk about the racist events in the past. Nothing even can prevent the discussion of racism that exists today in this world. But I believe as a country tries to heal from the past, and after reading and studying about this issue, when I had an experience in 2004 when I went with my wife to Poland, and I had friends that were African-American, Asian, Hispanic in high school, played basketball. I actually was pretty decent and got to travel a little bit playing on the travel team, and had friends of all races. And we would talk about this issue as friends. I'm a Gen Xer. Nobody talks about us. We're not popular, but we kind of figured it out on the ball court. And I didn't say that they didn't have certain situations tougher, right? I really think as legislators, words matter. As Americans, Georgians, people that communicate, when we have conversations, words matter. And facts are stubborn things. And I literally and intentionally use the term is, and there were people that wanted me to use the word was. And I emphatically told them respectfully, no. There have been racist situations in our country. And we had a person testify who said, you know what, in America today, there are racists of every race. There are people that hate each other based on the color of another person's skin. But we are all colleagues. You know, I grew up being taught about my mom and dad being in the middle of a city that was too busy to hate, right? And that we truly live in a state that is too great to hate. So people may have a philosophical disagreement with me using is versus was. I respect that. But ultimately, we as Americans, I believe now as a country, we have come a long way to address the sins of the past. And I have a personal faith belief that here on this earth, we're a fallen people and we will never be able to completely make up for the past. We can only do what we can do today. And my goal is to ensure that every single child of every single race is never put in a position by anybody, inadvertently or on purpose, to believe that somehow that they are inferior or superior to each other.
I appreciate your careful use of the word "is" there. I do worry that because of the system we have of who gets to interpret that the amount of care that you've taken to use that word might not be used to interpret it. But that leads me to my second question is line 43 through 44, which I have the same concern over. It defines race scapegoating as meaning assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or to an individual of a particular race because of his or her race. And my question specifically is about the incidents that I mentioned, the Trail of Tears, the Constitution defining a Black man as 3/5 of a person, and the Supreme Court saying we can inter people based on their race. That was those are three clear incidents of one race because they are of that one race, objectifying another race because they are of that race. How do you teach that without triggering this definition of race?
The only trigger that would occur, respectfully, would be if a teacher says that a child that is in a K-12 setting in a Georgia school or a charter school is at fault, blame, bias because of the color of their skin as they sit there in the classroom in today in 2022. Going forward.
Can you point me to that, where that
Well,
is in here?
I'm happy to have legislative counsel try to clarify. I'm open if there is a need for legislative language change, but ultimately it's talking about assigning fault and blame. Remember, to students in the classroom. This is not talking about the fact that there may have been certain races that made decisions. I mean, I had a really good conversation with a history professor and he said, all right. And he actually told me, he said, I struggle with race issues in my class. I didn't even know the guy, South Georgia, called me up on the weekend and I'm bad about answering my phone if it rings. We talked and he said, you know, I teach about Egypt. I love it. You know, how do I teach what the Egyptians did to the Hebrews? How do I teach that? I'm going to be, he had pulled up a little slightly. We had 14 edits on this bill. So we've been working on it. And so it was a slightly different, and he helped me understand, all right, I'm with you now. At first he had the same concern. He also is one that was concerned about is versus was. And is very important. And in this setting, it is not talking about the past. And as Chairman Dubnik asked about when you're teaching these things, you know, there are teachers in this country and the media loves to use the term CRT. Both sides have concerns. People have beliefs. It's a theory in a law class. That's fine. Teachers are not going to be in violation of this law if they say the word CRT. Okay. But if they decide that their classroom needs to be completely taught through that lens, then a parent has a concern, they're going to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, can we talk about this? Let's reason together. That's my approach on most anything, especially the most difficult conversations. Like when my 8-year-old told me she wants to go on a date, which is not happening.
Last one.
So is that, I really think we got to remember the context of, we're not saying we can't talk about the past or teach about the past. We can't subscribe blame to current students just because they happen to be a certain race.
I appreciate you sharing with us that that's your intent. I am concerned about some of the language here, but the last question, Mr. Chairman, is would you be amenable to expanding the scope or the definition of divisive concepts here to include sexual orientation and gender identity?
Well, I'm not necessarily, nobody's asked me that question. So ultimately, for my situation and for this bill situation, I look at this as, I want to make sure that we look at a code that federal law is clear on. And I'm not certain that the federal situation that we're in, where those definitions may be in discussions, and I've heard from attorneys that have advised through this process, there are people that wanted me to include that. There are other language that I wasn't going to do. And I said, look, I want to focus in on race, all children, whether they're female, male, any other thing that you want to try to label, it doesn't matter. Every single person has a race. I happen to try to view it first and foremost as the pinnacle, which is the human race, the construct of man, and we have all assigned other races based out through all historical facts. But I don't want to have blame, and I didn't want to bring in other important conversations into something which honestly might prevent us from being able to address what I believe is the most, the current issue that has the
And
biggest
Representative,
concern,
Protecting children, right?
protecting children.
I'll tell you, because I know he won't brag on himself. That thing about taking the phone calls, he takes them. And I strongly urge and push you to go meet with Representative Wade and to bring those recommendations, because I promise you, he's going to pull that man right over there in, and they're going to look at the language together with you. I've seen it. He mentioned 14 revisions. I thought that was just the 14 he gave me. But I pledge on his behalf that he will work with you. And I appreciate very much if you bring those topics for conversation to him. And I know he would appreciate them as well. So thank you for that. Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill. On lines, I think it was 72, 73, you talked about the training of teachers in classroom. My question would be, what are we going to do about those teachers that come out of colleges? We don't know what they might be teaching. We don't know the concepts that they're teaching. And what are some of the things that we can do to help with that situation?
Sure. So what I would say is similar to my response to Representative Wilson would be, I think that the training of teachers is something that I do believe largely as teachers enter the classroom and the workforce. I know as a school board member, I remember that our new teachers for 3 years had a mentor and they would work with them. And in some cases through our review process, many of you may be familiar with terms like LEAKS and TEAKS, which are the evaluation tools. I think there's an honest conversation that can be had with local school superintendents, working with organizations like GSBA, GSSA, and GAE and others to say, okay, are there areas of our training programs that we need to address related to any topic, right? Do we need to update those? I think a separate discussion if that becomes an issue. But ultimately, I think what would happen is this bill would, if this becomes law, then education in schools are going to realize, hey, if you're going to be going in a K-12 setting, we've got phenomenal colleges and universities that I think will have an opportunity to include that in their training. So I want to be very careful because this is an area in which we know the vast majority of teachers do their job extremely well each and every day. Sometimes they make a mishap. I think most school systems have a good process to address training concerns, but ultimately a teacher, for example, if they have a peer who may be a new teacher and they've got concerns about how they're teaching topics in their classroom that might go against this, that teacher would have an opportunity to talk to the principal and say, hey, can we have a committee meeting to discuss this situation? It's a new teacher. I don't think they're doing it maliciously. Can we address it? And I think this will allow that local flexibility to address those concerns when they arise.
One follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask, my question deals with a comment that was made a while ago about how that the racism in this country, that what we did to the Indians, what we did to the blacks, what we did to the Japanese during war. But isn't it, wouldn't you say that it's true that every war that's ever been fought and every conquest that's ever been made, racism was at the bottom of all of it? And so that, I mean, if you teach about any of it, you're teaching those concepts. So and when I was teaching, I taught about all that stuff. Students ask questions. You cannot, if a student asks a question, not tell them the truth, because they know when you're jiving them.
The students of Georgia are a lot smarter than some people give them credit. I agree.
So I just wanted to make that comment that, all these wars that we talk about in history and stuff, there's race there somewhere, whether it's against the Indians or whether it was the British against the French or the French against the Germans, or Attila the Hun against everybody. He conquered. So,
Right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I have some similar questions to some of the things that Representative Wilson brought up. And to give you a little bit of background, I did work in public schools in Atlanta and DeKalb for 10 years doing after-school programming, and spent time in the classroom with kids every single week for a decade. And line 30 specifically, I know that you discussed that already, the is versus was. When it comes to current events, it is really important for students to have a safe space to talk about them, right?
I agree.
And so some of the current events that have occurred that would impact children in the public school system, because we do know that the majority of children in public schools are children of color, right? So how would an educator be able to have an honest conversation about a current event like the killing of George Floyd if he or she has Black students in the classroom and they want to know why Black men are disproportionately killed by law enforcement? I mean, that's a fact.
Would you like me to answer the question?
Yes,
Okay,
I
I
do.
want to make sure you were finished. So number one, first, I appreciate your question. And I appreciate our dialogue the other day on this, and I'm glad that you've had an opportunity to review it. So if you'll go with me to line 85 on page 4. So this is in the area of the bill that will ensure that we do not, this is what the bill will not do. We will not prohibit the use of curricula that addresses the topics of slavery, racial oppression, racial segregation, or racial discrimination, including topics relating to enactment and enforcement of laws resulting in racial oppression, segregation, and discrimination in professional and academically appropriate manner and without espousing personal political beliefs. So teachers are still going to have the opportunity to teach, and they're going to be able to discuss the issues of the day. As I articulated earlier, and I would argue that there will be something that has happened in this state that may make the news tonight that none of us are aware of because we're sitting in this, and it may be the next topic of discussion in current events, especially in high schools in this state. This bill will not limit the opportunity for dialogue and discussion. What this bill is going to do is to ensure that an individual teacher, and I'm going to give you an example. I did not share this in subcommittee because I do not want to pick on my local community because I love them, but we're not perfect. And I won't go into any exact details, but we had an issue in our community in which a teacher tried to address the issue of the KKK and the issue of slavery by making every white male in the class dress up as KKK members, and every girl and other person in the room of color or not of color, white girls, wear outfits or be in a position where they look like they were slaves. And literally went through, this was not a drama class, this was not a play. This was a teacher who was, I believe she thought she was trying to make them have that aha moment that I experienced when I went to Poland and saw Auschwitz and Birkenau, talked to people who had were fortunate to be on this earth because their family member happened to survive. So I'm saying all that to say, this will not prohibit tough discussions, but had this bill been enacted, that community would have been able to have a process that was clearly defined, that parents could have been immediately pointed out. They had concerns, but it also was something that took a while to respond to because there wasn't something clear and concise. They were able to get there. The teacher received an appropriate, and guess what? The teacher's reprimand that happened, the parents that were concerned were not privy to the exact outcome because it became a personnel matter. But that teacher did have, it was more than just a reprimand. It was a serious violation, but it could only go so far. It was ambiguous. And so I had that former superintendent who was no longer a superintendent, they retired, talk to me about that situation and how this will give an opportunity to make sure everyone can come to the table. But there will be communities will have that conversation, right? Parents, teachers, administrators. If there's an incident like one teacher has a conversation and maybe there's one student that just wants to understand and is confused and they talk to mom and dad. Hey, I think the teacher is trying to say that I'm at fault because I'm white and I'm the only white kid in the classroom. Or if you're in North Georgia and you happen to be in a district where it's a majority white community, there may be a situation where there's one African-American kid, one Asian child that says, I think they're saying that, you know, I'm somehow inferior because I happen to be of this race. Then they would be able to say, this is the example. This was the discussion. This was the coursework, and let the schools have a proper place to discuss it, work through it, and have the parents listen to. This is really about making sure kids and parents have an equal seat at the table.
And Representative Wynn, I'm not cutting you off, but for everyone who has a button lit up, we're down to 17 minutes and there's a lot of buttons. So again, that has nothing to do with you, Representative Wynn. I just wanted to make that statement to the committee as a whole.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, Mr. Chair, if I may. I'm having trouble understanding though, that line 30, right? We're talking about present day. And we as a country, we still have laws on the book that are systemically racist. So how are we able to talk about that with school children in a whole and honest way? Is it your belief that our country currently as it is has eradicated all systemic racism?
I think the gentlelady knows that that is not what any person would reasonably believe in this world, let alone our country. But I do believe America happens to be one of the countries on this planet that is the best and brightest for the entire world to learn from our mistakes especially. And is and was is different. And I will never argue that we were and had racist undertones to certain things. And you can talk through that, but to do it in a manner that it creates a lens to which it pits individual students in a classroom against each other. And that is what the teacher wants to do, to say that it is. I know that is and was is, different, but it's a very important distinction. So now there may be people that believe that I'm wrong, and I will just have to agree to disagree.
And, I'm also struggling in the same way Representative Wilson was with line 43. Race scapegoating means assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race. So I understand the second portion, right? To an individual of a particular race because his or her race. That the second portion of that line is designed so that educators aren't blaming individuals or students, right? But that first section, how do you accurately talk about the history of Georgia, the present day Georgia, without talking about the very real fact that race, as Representative Benton said, does play a role?
I believe teachers in this state will quickly and easily adjust and adapt when needed based on the lines that I shared with him about the academic freedom that they have and appropriately, but also not do it from a political lens. It is a difficult situation at difficult times, but ultimately this is about putting that on the child. And I had somebody speak to me after, one of the members of this committee, saying that, you know, we want kids, you know, they may feel guilty because of the tough conversation. They might. I had a daughter that came home in first grade when we talked about it, and she was very upset that a friend in her class who happens to be a person of color, that what if that was her grandma? Why would we hurt her Nana? Why did that happen, Daddy? And we as parents had that conversation. But in a moment, she felt guilty because she felt empathy. She's a first grader. I'm not going to call the principal because there wasn't anything wrong there. That was her own reflection of a topic. What I want to prevent is if a teacher gets up there and says, now, Ms. Wade, you need to write, you know, sentences that you're white and that you're to blame for every single atrocity in the past. I know that's a stark contrast, and but my point is those are the type of incidents. And again, this is to allow a process for parents to raise their hand. It doesn't mean that the parent is always going to be right. Sometimes kids don't fully tell the truth about a situation. So that's why there's going to be a process to review the concern.
Thank you, Representative. I would just suggest that that particular line 43, it really does need to be tightened up, because I'm sure that you, and you've mentioned this already, a lot of this is going to be subjective. A lot of this is going to be different parents feeling different things. It's going to put educators in a really tight spot and create a chilling effect, because they're going to be worried about getting disciplined, getting fired. And when we have legislation that is not very tight in the language, there are unintended consequences that I don't believe that you want to see happen. And then, Mr. Chair, I know that we're running out of time, but I just have one more question, which is line 40. Can you define meritocracies?
So I believe the gentlelady knows what merit is. And there are the idea that meritocracies, meaning that e pluribus unum, out of many one, that every single person in this country has merit, and that your merit is what helps you get to where you're going. I don't think I need to, as a legislator, define meritocracies, but if you would like to discuss that with legal counsel, I'm open to that consideration. Let's talk via email or communicate. I'm not opposed to having that, but I also don't think it's a legislator's job to define every single word. And I think that it's a reasonable, known definition of what merit is and how countries are aligned around meritocracies, different than potentially a socialist nation or a communist nation.
Representative, just if you don't mind, I need to move on. A lot of lights. Representative Laurikia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the bill, and I certainly appreciate your hard work and the intent of the legislation. But as I sit here and listen, I've heard the comment that facts are stubborn things, regardless of our passions and our inclinations and those kinds of things. But I worry that if a General Assembly or a legislature tries to put into law all of the little things that you can and can't talk about in a classroom, then you're covering over with a shadow what really might be still happening in the hearts of people. They just can't talk about it. And you're kicking that can down the road. And I say this respectfully with Democrat friends that are sitting in here. We've already talked about electing school boards. This wouldn't happen in my county. You think I run a hard election running for this seat? I'd beat every board member in Douglas if some of the things were happening in Coffee County that are happening around this country. So there's a part of me that just wants people to keep making mistakes and keep messing up. And again, I say this respectfully, but you're fixing to see a wave of Democrats get beat in elections like you've never seen, because of some of the conversation of vaccine mandates and CRT and these things. They're just not being completely honest about what's really happening in communities in the world. Has that been talked about any? That we want free speech. We talk about that as Republicans, and we fight for freedom and free speech, but we bring legislation that may somehow limit parts of what you can talk about, even if they're wrong, you know, even if the facts aren't correct. And I worry about that a little bit.
I appreciate the gentleman's concern. So ultimately, I don't believe that what this bill is going to do is to stifle conversations about difficult issues, or to, as you said, allow individuals to, you'll have to explain to me a little bit, but about making mistakes, maybe pushing the envelope too far on their political ideology, if I'm interpreting that correctly. What this is to ensure is that it is happening, and it may not be happening at a systemic level, but it is happening on occasion. And I believe because of the call to action from parents, that they do want to be heard. And for me, this is about making sure that the parent, the teacher, there is no difference between them. They're all sitting at a round table, and that child is in the center of the table. And that's their focus. And how do we get through this? How do we make sure that we don't allow divisive concepts? Because at some point, we've seen what happened during the summer. And I want people, this is me, my heart talking. What happened in the streets during the middle of a pandemic when people were burning private property and people lost lives was completely and totally unacceptable. When people did the same thing on January 6th, it was completely and totally, it was ridiculous. It is unlawful. The rule of law should apply to all of us. And I believe that there's a process going forth, but the media wants to try to spin things in a different way. And kids are asking questions. How do we deal with that? How do we talk about it? We can talk about it, but we don't need to subscribe blame. And ultimately, I believe the way that I've approached this is to define the things that maybe not every single American will agree with, but the most and the vast majority will agree that these are divisive concepts, and this is how we should address these to ensure that we're not allowing that to encroach in the classroom setting. Teachers are going to be okay. I think there's a fear, just like there are parents that have fears. And I'm trying to balance those two concerns with something that's reasonable and defines a process so that we can have the opportunity to take some really tough situations and let folks address them locally. And in the small chance that it can't be handled locally, then there's a process for that parent to be heard. And it's also, I think, thoughtful and reasonable.
Thank you. Monitor's frozen again. Committee, we have 6 minutes left. We have 3 lights. All I ask is that you be respectful of that and your peers and colleagues. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this bill. I want to know, first of all, where did your definition of from these divisive concepts, where did they come from?
Through discussions with probably about 11 different advocacy groups, as well as some attorneys that have been dealing with this type of issue. I mean, there's other states that have had similar legislation, so I'm sure that they have sourced that information from other places. But again, I went through a process personally of reading them, discussing it with folks, and narrowing it down to these.
Thank you. I was looking for the term current events. I know previous versions of other bills have had that. Is there a term current events anywhere in this legislation?
I'll have to defer legislative counsel, but it definitely is the intent to ensure that, I mean, I don't know that current events has to be in there because it's a part of teaching and it's a part of the Georgia standards. We're not touching Georgia standards, but I'm happy to consider.
So we're not prohibiting talking about current events in this, but I would like to know, just to make sure in scanning it, I didn't see
We
it.
are not preventing that. It's not.
And Representative Evans, we'll allow our counsel to comment on that and get that answer to you just in the interest of time.
And then I wanted to walk through the complaint process, but I guess I'll need to do that. I mean,
Let you and I talk. Since it's a
I am
hearing only.
concerned about the complaint process and the culture that might create in our schools. So I do want to walk through that with you.
I will say this, there are complaint processes that every single administrator in this state, and there's some in this room that have experienced. Most schools have it down pat. This is to try to align this issue so that parents have a clear understanding that they have a seat at the table. I've had more parents contact me saying that they did not know that they had an opportunity to address those kind of concerns in a systematic, informative process.
Thank you. Representative Carter. Hold on. Screen's frozen. And Representative, you're not recognized for that motion at this time. And as I have, I'm sorry. I understand, but in keeping with the direction of Representative Wilson that I asked, I'll make the same recommendation. And if anyone has sat in my office to discuss a bill, you've heard the same thing. I encourage you to work with the author of the bill. And that's my edict to the entire committee and to anyone listening, sitting, or watching. You work with the author of the bill first. And I see the heads nodding in this room because you've heard me say that. I'm the referee. If you want me to choose, I'm happy to call it a foul or not, but we have very able-bodied legislative counsel, and we have a representative who has poured his heart and soul into something. And so please work with them. And if you can't find common ground or anything, then by all means, bring it in the form of a motion. But since we're not taking action today, we'll move on. And Vice Chairman Irwin, I'll let you land this plane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Wade, thank you for the effort that I've seen that you put into this bill and the thought, not only with your family, but with the different groups that we have represented around us and in this state. But one that I asked in the subcommittee that is so important to me is with our experts, and I saw Matt Cardoza come in the room from DOE. With this process and going through this, and the fact that we charge them to develop the standards, which I've had personal interactions with myself, and then giving the curriculum on to the school system, local schools to be developed through those standards. Walk me through that process with the DOE and you.
Sure. So I do appreciate Matt Cardoza being here and the DOE staff. We worked, I don't know how many iterations together specifically with concerns and comments and thoughts and discussion, but I would say an exhaustive collective 6, 7, 8 hours probably. That may be short. Matt might say more like 20. And they helped provide feedback as to where the department and where our state school superintendent would be comfortable as their role in this. And they also had the same thought and sense that this would be in a kind of a worst case scenario when you just had a situation that a local community could not address, and they have corrective action plans already that they use. They don't use them often, but it's there and it's already existing in law for them to do that. This just makes sure that that happens. And they worked with me to make sure we had language that they were comfortable with, that they felt would be workable with local schools as well as the department and their staff.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, and I know we're out of time, but one quick follow-up. When
Sure.
you left that meeting or those meetings and that time with the DOE, did you experience angst from them on being able to implement this, be able to continue to write the standards for education for the state?
They were very thankful that we did not touch standards, and they were very appreciative of the process. I don't want to speak for the gentleman, but I think he's nodding. And it was welcomed, and we wanted to have a good conversation to try to get that part of this bill right. So yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wade. I appreciate your 2 hours earlier today and your hour plus here. I thank the members of the committee. We are at 4:30, seeing nothing online. Seeing nothing else,